You have nothing to fear, Your Grace.
We all need to leave.
I haven't really gotten a chance to talk about Game of Thrones because I didn't want to just say the same thing that everyone else was saying. So I waited. And while I waited, I desperately searched to see if I can find any patterns that might help make sense of what happened with Season 8. And after Episode 3, I wrote out this long explanation about how the Night King's death made a prequel show about the White Walkers basically impossible, but after every episode, it seemed like the internet got more and more saturated with Game of Thrones videos, and it was to the point where channels that didn't even talk about movies or Game of Thrones were making videos about it. I really wanted to make Season 8 make sense, but the more I looked at the details of the story, the more it became obvious to me what happened with Season 8. And no, this isn't going to be a theory or one of my usual videos, but I do think it's going to change the way you think about Season 8 forever. Now, I did come up with this really wild idea about Littlefinger actually killing the Night King, but the more interesting idea is that Season 8 might have been so genius and so perfect of an ending that it completely went over everybody's head.
Are you drunk?
I remember how I felt after watching Season 8.
Best season ever!
But now that I've had some time to take my emotions out of it and look at Season 8 from a logical perspective, I honestly believe that Season 8 was done on purpose.
You have a very suspicious mind.
Now, I've probably seen every episode at least 5 times, and I've read the main books twice. I've read World of Ice and Fire, Dunk and Egg, Rogue Prince, and hundreds of theories and analysis on Reddit and YouTube, so I consider myself to be a Game of Thrones expert. The story feels like D&D wrote Season 8 and purposely did the opposite of everything we were expecting. But it wasn't done in a way that could be called a subversion of expectation. A subversion of expectation is something that happens that you didn't think was an option. It's basically a twist that doesn't happen at the end of the story, but it still has to make narrative sense. So Ned Stark's death or the Red Wedding makes sense, but you didn't expect the plot to take that direction. You didn't expect main characters to be killed without any resolution to their story. But Arya killing the Night King doesn't fit into this because we all knew he was gonna die, so it really didn't matter who killed him. A subversion would have been like finding out Bran was really the Night King, or he was controlling everything the whole time, or maybe if someone that we thought had died really was alive or secretly a faceless man or something. That would be a subversion of expectation. Now, I am gonna explain why I think this season was sabotaged on purpose, but because I'm obsessed with trying to find answers to everything, I'm gonna show you what I mean by opposite. And then I'm gonna play devil's advocate a little bit too, because I think the more things don't make sense, the easier it is to find things in the chaos that do. Now, there's a lot of things that seem like they were the worst creative decisions that you can make in Season 8. Like, it didn't make sense for Melisandre to die in the snow instead of dying in the fire. If she was being kept alive by a fire god, then why wouldn't she ask to be burned on one of the funeral pyres? Or why did Cersei kill Missandei instead of keeping her as a hostage so Dany wouldn't burn down King's Landing? Or why did Varys, the most cunning and elusive person in Westeros, who managed to survive multiple kings and was able to gain the respect and fear of some of the most powerful people in the world, all of a sudden become this useless idiot that can't even outsmart people who don't even know how to play a game that he's a master at? I realized that it didn't make any sense for Dany to leave Dragonstone, fly past the Red Keep to the front gate, just to fly back across King's Landing to kill Cersei. You see, those are opposites of what would have made sense. The reason we fell in love with this story is because of how unpredictable it was. Anyone can die at any moment, and many of the characters make really stupid choices that don't seem to make any sense. Joffrey killing Ned, Cat kidnapping Tyrion, Oberyn showing off while fighting the Mountain, Robb marrying some random chick. Just idiotic decisions. But no one had anything to say because it was George R.R. Martin making the decisions. Think about this. Daenerys flipping out and killing everyone at King's Landing seems like it was really out of nowhere, but think about all the times she's been lied to or how many people tried to trick her or take advantage of her. Her killing everyone honestly isn't even out of character. Dany can be really heartless at times. She let her brother get killed right in front of her and she didn't even care. She crucified a bunch of people and she even locked 2 people in a safe to starve to death just for trying to trick her. Or what about the idiotic battle plan at Winterfell? The trebuchets on the front line, the Unsullied in front of the barricades, or the Dothraki not having Valyrian steel or dragonglass weapons. Seems really stupid, right? But what person at Winterfell was some seasoned military strategist? The Hound was just a soldier. Jon is just a soldier. The Unsullied, the Dothraki, and the Night's Watch are all just soldiers. It's not like they had Randall Tarly or Stannis Baratheon in there, so it's possible that they just came up with a stupid battle plan. But I'm just playing devil's advocate here. It doesn't make the season any better just because I can come up with these answers, but all I'm saying is, on a story level, I think some of the bigger things that I've seen people complain about can be explained away pretty easily. But we criticize D&D for making a really stupid Season 8, but it's not like they haven't made up great stuff that wasn't in the books. The Battle of the Bastards and Hardhome aren't in the books. A lot of the conversations and interactions between Cersei and Tyrion weren't in the books. Most of the Littlefinger stuff isn't in the books, and the Hound vs. Brienne Tarth isn't in the books either. So D&D know how to make good scenes on their own. But I realized that Season 8 was done on purpose after George recently announced that he was nowhere near finished with the new book. The first season of Game of Thrones premiered in 2011, and 2 months later George released the 5th book, so D&D had at least 5 seasons worth of material and George had 5 years to finish a new book. After Season 4 ended, D&D were forced to start making up things that they hadn't intended on having to create when they started the show. They didn't agree to make the show because they wanted to write their own story. It was supposed to be just a simple adaptation, and they were actually really good at doing that when they had book material to adapt. But it's crazy to think that just because you read the books and been told a few secrets by George himself that you're just going to be able to continue writing genius level material. But that's what the fans demanded. D&D were supposed to just absorb George's genius and start making something that was comparable to the novels. I mean, if it was that easy to write a genius level story, then George wouldn't be special. And he would have finished the books by now too. Everyone seems to forget that it's taken George a fucking decade to finish Winds of Winter. But D&D were supposed to basically write an entire book's worth of story in like 6 months. Let me say that again. George R.R. Martin has been writing this new book for 9 years, but D&D were supposed to basically finish 2 books worth of story and film it in only a few years. Do you realize how insane of a request that is? It wasn't just that George left D&D hanging with no new story to adapt. He actually started throwing these little subtle jabs at the show, saying that he didn't have time to watch it, but he had time to watch these other shows. And in every interview, he made it a point to make sure that everyone knew that the books and the show weren't the same. George not only left them hanging, but he threw him under the bus like him not finishing the book was somehow their fault. And it's not like the books were all finished and D&D just said, "Fuck it, we're gonna just start doing our own thing." I think D&D realized that they were in a no-win situation, so they decided to destroy George's legacy. Just think about this. 70 or 80% of Game of Thrones fans will never read the books, and they'll always think of Season 8 as the official story. Because I've had people at my job ask me if the books ended the same way as the show because they had no idea the books weren't even finished, and they had zero intention on ever reading them. The only real option for the show would have been to just pull a Walking Dead and keep introducing new characters and plots until people stop watching it, but Walking Dead doesn't cost a gazillion dollars each season to make, so all you really need is an abandoned building and some zombie makeup and a dozen characters in dirty clothes and you got an episode. But D&D basically destroyed Game of Thrones, and in the minds of at least 70% of the fans, they destroyed George's legacy. And if you watch their interviews, they don't even try to explain why they made certain creative choices. It was like, oh yeah, we just kind of forgot. That sounds like 2 guys that pulled off the perfect murder with the perfect alibi. Plausible deniability. They can easily hide behind the fact that they signed up to adapt books and not create their own story, and they can blame George's lack of new books or a misunderstanding of the notes that he gave them about Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring. And this is why George is having a hard time finishing the story. He knows that his legacy depends on the books being better than the show. So George is now under a lot of pressure to outdo seasons 5 and 6 with the new books, and he knows that if the books are too close to the show, everyone is just going to assume that the last book will be like season 7 and 8. And even though his writing is really detailed and complicated, I think even the most dedicated book fan is tired of reading 2 pages worth of details about food. It's just like, finish the damn story already. Now let's be honest, D&D will never do anything better than Game of Thrones. This is as bright as their star will ever shine. So I think they got the ultimate revenge for being talked down to and thrown under the bus, and they decided to kill George R.R. Martin's legacy on purpose.